So, and we have started recording. Jerry, I have a question. Did the old link not work, so people had to use only the new one?
There's a unique link for each meeting. So I'm not sure if people try to use a previous link or something like that, but each meeting has a unique link, yes.
Yeah, there's Jim. Hi, Jim. Okay, I think it's about a minute and Ray Serrano is joining us, so we're good. Right, there you are. Welcome. Okay, let me call the meeting to order, and Secretary Fielder just joined us, so we are in good shape. We have just a few items on the agenda this afternoon, in addition to the regular items that we need to cover. We have an update on the recommendations that we heard from the Faculty Advisory Council a couple of meetings ago, which Dr. Dow will be sharing some update on that. There are a number of informational reports and one item under academic affairs that requires a vote in terms of a proposed amendment. And before I turn things over to Secretary Fielder, Dr. Dow, I understand you have a couple of people you would like to introduce.
Thank you, Commissioner Surkamp. I'm actually going to turn the time over to Trish Gordon-McCown, our Director for Academic Affairs. She is in our conference room with some new staff. So Trish, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, we're very pleased to announce that we have 2 new staff members starting today, and I'll introduce them in just a minute. As many of you are aware, we've been hiring a number of new people, primarily in our program review unit, but we're also backfilling positions from individuals who were promoted or elected to transition over to program review. So I'm going to start here in the front. This is Danita Moore. Danita is joining our Career Workforce Education Unit, also known as our Private Career School Unit. She comes to us most recently from Delaware State, I'm sorry. And so she joins our Private Career School Unit as an Education Policy Analyst. Is there anything you'd like to say?
Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to join the organization.
Okay. And then we have Alexandra Edelstein. Alexandra comes to us from Johns Hopkins, and she joins us in our Program Review Unit as an Education Policy Analyst. So, Alexandra, would you like to say anything?
Hi, everyone. You can call me Allie if you like. It's nice to meet all of you virtually.
So welcome to both of you, and Trish, thank you for those introductions. And Secretary Fielder, let me turn things over to you. I think I was supposed to let you handle the introduction, so I preempted you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Just a couple quick updates. In addition to the 2 staff members you were just introduced to, we've hired 13 new members within the last year at IMHEC. And one of the really interesting things was we had a end of year celebration, holiday party, luncheon, whichever way you prefer to call it, yesterday. We had a really good turnout and a lot of fun and good conversation. One of the things we did was also do the service awards for those that have an anniversary, the 5th, the 10th, the 15th, the 20th, the 25th. And the longest serving individual is the name you recognize, Paris, who is our IT, is now at 37 years.
Oh my goodness.
She corrected me. I said 36, and she said, no, 37. So that means she started when she was 2. It's quite interesting to realize that some of these new staff members are taking on some big roles. We're probably the only state, at least the only state that I know of right now, that is working on 2 stage 1 applications to create 2 new doctors of osteopathic medicine schools, one at Morgan State University and the other at Meritus Health System, which is a health system in Hagerstown. So both of those are moving along in stage 1 and hopefully quickly into stage 2, so we can continue to look at the shortages as physicians and other allied health professions. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Secretary Fielder. There are no public comments today, so first item of business is to approve the minutes from our October 26, 2022 meeting. If I could have a motion. Thank
Motion
you.
to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Howland, seconded by Commissioner Serrano. Any additions, deletions, amendments at all? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed or abstaining? Okay, I think that's a positive, Debbie, from everyone. Let's move on to committee updates, and I don't know that the committees have had a chance to meet again, but Commissioner Boyd, anything from the Education Policy Committee?
Nothing from the Education Policy Committee during this period, like the issues that are usually necessary for this group to examine did not come up during this period. So no reports at this time.
All right, thank you very much. Commissioner Coleman, on
No
outreach grants and financial assistance?
No report.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Newman, anything on the finance side?
The secretary pretty much covered the new people we've gotten. We also have put together an office where our 10th floor conference room used to be for an associate director of institutional review when that person is brought on. And we're proceeding through fiscal 2023, getting ready to defend our budget for fiscal 2024.
It's never ending, right?
That's right.
Thank you. And Commissioner McDaniels on DEI?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The DEI committee did have an informative session last week where we interacted with DEI directors from 8 institutions across the state of Maryland. The colleges that were represented included the Community College of Baltimore County, Prince George's Community College, Towson University, University of Maryland, Morgan State University, St. Mary's College of Maryland, Mount St. Mary's College, and Johns Hopkins University. This was a 2-hour virtual listening session that allowed our committee to gain an understanding of current DEI-related efforts across Maryland and the associated challenges. There were quite a few of common issues presented, such as the challenges in recruiting and retaining a diverse staff, increasing graduation rates, along with other common themes. But there were also items presented that our committee had not previously discussed, such as addressing the inclusion issues of neurodiverse students and incorporating mental health challenges in the DEI arena. The participants in this session seemed to appreciate the opportunity to see the presentations made by other institutions. The community colleges seem to have a regularly scheduled forum for sharing best practices and collaborating, but it wasn't clear the opportunities exist for 4-year colleges to do the same. And there was a request made by some of the participants for a follow-up session. So our committee is going to digest what we heard and develop how we can effectively support the DEI efforts within the role that's defined for MHEC. And on a related topic, since the DEI committee was a newly established committee last year, we created a mission statement for ourselves that at some point should probably be reviewed by the entire commission and also reviewed to assure that our mission falls within the charge and legal constraints of MHEC's authority. So I'd also like to thank Dr. Barbara Schmertz of MHEC for facilitating the meeting last week, and also Bryson Barksdale and Glenda Abney from MHEC for their support to keep our committee focused and moving forward. So that's the report we have.
Thank you, Commissioner McDaniels. And it sounds like the committee has made some nice progress and has done some significant outreach. And so I think it would be important for us to schedule some time at the next meeting if you're ready, or the meeting after that. You let us know what works best for you to give us a fuller update and also to take a look at the mission statement. That'd be great.
Sure. Thank you.
Any questions for any of the committee chairs at all, even for those committees that didn't have a meeting or reports? Any questions or comments at all? Okay, good. Then I think we're ready to move forward. And the first item up, Dr. Dow, is for you to provide us an update on the recommendations from the Faculty Advisory Council.
Yes, thank you. And good afternoon, commissioners. You might remember that the Faculty Advisory Council presented recommendations last June to the Commission on a variety of topics and things we should consider as we move ahead in this next academic year. Chair Surkamp had asked me to report back out on where we are on some of these recommendations, what we've been able to pick up. For a bit of context, the Faculty Advisory Council is a statutory advisory council that consists of representatives from all of the colleges and universities in Maryland. We send an invitation to college presidents to submit nominees for representatives. So technically every college has a representative, but not every college sends a representative. But nonetheless, it is a pretty healthy group of about 30 different faculty members that range from community colleges, 4 years, and include our private institutions as well. So this really comes from a diverse group. So I'll walk you through the recommendations. I don't want to spend too much time kind of going into each one of these. I'd rather talk about the ones that we're working on. But these are the recommendations that they presented back in June. So there was a group the year prior, so in the 2020 to 2021 academic year. They had recommendations, but the group hadn't officially approved those recommendations. So they kind of got carried over into the more recent academic year of recommendations. So these are really about a year old in terms of the recommendations. So they're a little dated. So they had made a recommendation that we establish a transfer with success committee. That's in a reflection of the transfer with success bill. They made a recommendation that we need to make recommendations on a new platform around transfer, essentially ArtSys 2.0. They made a recommendation about providing funding for transfer coordinators, providing funding for the maintenance of a new ArtSys system or transfer with success Maryland-wide platform. And that each Maryland higher education institution develop web pages with consistent designations and information. So again, take this all into context. This is about a year old and a lot of progress has been made since then. So what I've highlighted here are the things that we are working on. The items that are in green are kind of active items that we're working on, and the item that is in orange is an item that we are working on, but it's kind of a secondary item. The items that don't have a highlight are things that we've kind of put to the side just in terms of what we can prioritize and things we can work on. So we will absolutely, we've been working with a work group to implement the Transfer with Success Act requirements. We've participated when invited on updates to ArtSys. So our agency has sat at the table when we've been invited. ArtSys, as you may be aware, is a transfer system. It holds information about how students can navigate from one institution to another. University System of Maryland currently operates ARTSIS. They oversee it. They hold the data components to it. So it's a University System of Maryland product. And so again, when we are invited, we participate and provide input on ARTSIS and some recent implementation updates that they're doing. And then certainly we're asking Maryland institutions to make information publicly available on their website regarding transfer. So we're working on these issues. The funding ones are a bit different in terms of those are funding requests. And so we've noted them, and there's something to consider in future years. That pathway from 2-year to 4-year institutions, that committee continued, and they submitted additional recommendations in the 2022 report. Again, I won't go through each one of these because we're working on all of them, I'm happy to say. These are all things that we have implemented either through those revised regulations that you might remember from the summer that went into full effect in September, or we've put these items in a guidance document. I'm happy to share with you, I think this is a good opportunity to share with you that those regulations were huge. We made massive changes. With the help of SOMA, our Assistant Attorney General, and others, we've released a pretty detailed guidance document on how these new changes around transfer are to be implemented, clarifications on the process, and some additional information. So what you see on the screen is either implemented through regulation or implemented through a guidance document of some kind. So I'm proud of that work and excited that we've been able to move ahead on many of these recommendations. The Faculty Advisory Council also made recommendations on developmental education or remedial education, multi-measure assessment placement systems, and improved data collections. The first one is really an institutional recommendation. It's not necessarily something our agency can do. And we know many institutions are already doing multiple measures in terms of determining whether a student is college ready. We are working on improved data collections and not necessarily specifically on developmental education, but very broadly in terms of what we collect, how we collect it, what those definitions look like. So that's why it's in orange. It's not necessarily specific to developmental and remedial education, but we, under the leadership of Dr. Schmerch, we are reevaluating, again, the data that we collect, why we collect it, and creating some clearer pathways to that. Test optional admissions was another topic that the Faculty Advisory Council made recommendations on. Really making sure that institutions allow for test optional admission processes. Again, take this back, a year ago, many of the campuses had temporarily moved into test optional because of the pandemic. We know many of the campuses have now permanently implemented test optional procedures. So the reason why these are in yellow or in orange is because that they are not necessarily, again, something that MHEC can enforce, but we are certainly working with segment leaders to keep an eye on it and make them aware of these recommendations. Some recommendations that the Advisory Council put together on tenure, promotion, and unionization. This one's a bit trickier because this is more about employment, and our agency just typically does not deal with employment issues. But we certainly are collaborating with institutional leadership to talk about equity, as you heard from the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion subcommittee. We have our research staff evaluating that regularly when it comes to faculty, and they've just released a faculty dashboard that disaggregates information by race, ethnicity, tenure, and a handful of other, and pay equity to evaluate how faculty are being paid. Ensure ongoing adequate equitable funding for all public institutions of higher education. That's what we do regularly. That's what you saw in the September and October commission meetings when you were presented the budgets. So actively working in that direction around ensuring that faculty have the support that they need. The Faculty Advisory Council also made recommendations on social justice and systemic racism, really raising awareness around implementation of DEI strategies, and encouraging institutions to implement DEI practices. So again, raising awareness is, again, it's not an explicit to do for our agency, but we are certainly encouraging institutions to implement DEI practices and organizational practices. Again, I think that the DEI subcommittee heard about those practices, and you can see that campuses are doing it. So we're not mandating anything, but we are engaged. Our agency is engaged in that and ensuring that campuses are doing what they need to be doing and collaborating with one another, sharing good ideas, and making sure the campuses are being thoughtful about issues around social justice and systemic racism. Excuse me. Faculty professional development. Institutions should have centers of teaching and learning. MPEC should facilitate professional development for campuses. Sorry, excuse me. Faculty should have base knowledge and exposure to modalities of teaching. And then a recommendation around common language for teaching modalities. You've probably heard that campuses offered high flex, online hybrid, online in-person. They called classes different things to be flexible for students who may need to pop out because they've tested positive for COVID, or there was an outbreak on the campus, or they may have been exposed. So we realized campuses were calling these things lots of different terms. So we're working to think through that common language. This goes back to kind of our data collections, so that when we talk about online learning versus hybrid learning versus high flex learning, we start to use a common language when we're talking about modality. The other ones, again, are really institutional implementation, things that we're keeping an eye on, but not necessarily actively engaging with. So that's kind of the quick of what we're doing in terms of the recommendations that the Faculty Advisory Council presented last June. So making some progress. This year, I will say the Faculty Advisory Council has been tasked with a very specific item around our transfer regulations, and that is creating guidance around course equivalencies. It's a big to-do, lots of discussion, and I think our faculty are having aha moments around, is a intro to genetics course the same intro to genetics course at another school, and what does that look like, and how do we ensure that students can transfer a course appropriately? So you'll see at the end of the year, not necessarily as many recommendations from the Faculty Advisory Council, but a very strong guidance document around course equivalencies. So I'll stop there and answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Duck. Commissioner Howell?
All the way back in the very beginning, it was a long time ago right now, and it'll show my absolute oblivious stupidity about some items that we discuss all the time. When you were talking about the transfer with success program and the parameters of what was discussed and developed, but it's never been approved. Who approves that? Do we do that, or does it go someplace else for approval?
So you do that. Commissioners do that. We agency staff will present regulations. So in the context of transfer with success, a law was passed with the General Assembly. That law stays. And so we create regulations to fill in kind of the gray areas and flesh it out, create a process, make some definitions that maybe the law itself doesn't have the specificity. So those were regulations that you saw. I think we initially presented them in February. I think we came back to you in March with an initial formal adoption. And then they came back to the commission sometime over the summer for final adoption.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure we were, and I'm sure that Mary Pat is right on top of this, that we've done everything we need to do to get those things approved, because it's, they've been around a while. And my other question was, who provides the funding for all those things that are then mandated or at least highly suggested for the institutions? Where does the money come from?
So the institutions will usually adjust their budgets accordingly for these kinds of mandates where it clearly will require additional resources, it will require additional staff, but every campus is slightly different in terms of what they already have capacity to do. So we alerted the campuses over a year ago and said, this is going to cost you something. We don't know what, because it will depend on what you already have on your campus. So be prepared and start planning for that. So it's really at the institutional budget level.
Okay, thank you. Because every high school student that I meet, I tell them to try to consider a community college education for at least the first 2 years of the education, and then be able to transfer perhaps to a 4-year institution. So I want to make sure I'm saying the right thing. So good.
And on the academic side of that, our goal is that student, that community college student, particularly if they've completed an associate degree, can transfer fairly seamlessly into a reasonable program of study. They're not going from an English degree into a physics major, but they have pathways to be successful, and they're not taking on additional coursework. They're not taking on additional debt.
Right.
Absolutely. So that's what these academic regulations are trying to do.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
If I could just jump in, it's not often that I minimize the additional costs that institutions bear when more regulations come on. But, and Dr. Dower, Secretary Fielder, correct me if I'm oversimplifying things, but with all the changes that we made in that transfer for success policy, they really are the basic normal things that institutions should be doing. And if anything, it's probably built in a slightly higher expectation for communication between institutions. So if there's an expense, it's people's time, but I certainly don't think it's going to be burdensome on institutions.
All right, thank you.
Anything else? Did somebody, Secretary Fielder?
Yes, I just wanted to add to that. I think Commissioner Howell is right on target in terms of what you are already telling those high school students. And a couple of additional facts: within the last 2 years, maybe 2.5 years, Academic Affairs took on the project of creating a template for articulation agreements. The articulation agreement is really between a community college and a 4-year for a specific academic program, that if the student at the community college signs up and meets the criteria, GPA, and coursework, 100% of those courses that qualify transfer. So there's been a lot of effort in this, and it's going to continue to be. You're correct. There is no additional funding, but the funding in higher ed for the last couple of years has been very strong, and we expect that to continue with the new governor and the new administration, so we can make this more transparent so the students have access and success. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Fielder. Commissioner Williams?
Yes, thanks so much. And Dr. Dow, thanks so much for the hard work. There's so much there. Just a quick question on the course equivalency work stream. Could you provide a little bit of context, and I may have missed the detail, on the derivation of the 70% threshold reference, why 70%, and what the real world implications of that are in your view?
Absolutely. So when we first drafted the regulations, let me take a step back a little bit. The law requires that when a receiving institution denies the transfer of a course, they have to provide a reason for why it's not being transferred. So in the process of thinking through that, we realized we need to come up with some rules for why a course would be denied. And so one of those rules can be that there is no course equivalency. Well, so then we think, okay, well, if there's no course equivalency, what's our definition of courses being equivalent? And that's where we got to a rule or a standard of 70%. At that time, we had a group of stakeholders from both campuses, as well as segmental leadership, weighing in on this, and that work group agreed that 70% was going to be what we're going to go with. I also took that to the Faculty Advisory Council for them to weigh in, and there was debate about whether or not 70, and there continues to be debate about whether or not 70% is the right number. It's the number that we've chosen at this point, and so we're going to kind of stick with it. What that means in the real sense is exactly what the Faculty Advisory Council is challenged to do this year. So at our October meeting, we had them go through example syllabi that I found they were publicly accessible syllabi. Took an intro to economics course, intro to English composition, and a couple of other courses, and said, do you all think that these are the same courses based on the learning objectives? Are 70% of the learning objectives the same? And that exercise brought to the head all of the challenges, and this is not a word for word comparison. This is not, what do we do when the learning objectives on the syllabi aren't as explicit? What do we do when we talk about depth versus rigor? So we need to create a guidance document that answers some of those questions when we have faculty looking at course equivalencies and making a decision about whether or not two courses are the same. So we've started that draft guidance, and that'll be the product that they produce this year is really getting into the weeds of exactly that.
Thanks so much. Just so I have it right, is it guidance, or is there an MHEC regulatory requirement at 70%?
It's the 70% is an MHEC regulatory requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. How to do it, how to get to 70% will be in guidance.
So, excuse me, any other questions or comments? Commissioner Serrano?
Yeah, on the part when you discuss about the test-free policies, I've read a little bit about this kind of thing from at the universities, kind of moving towards that direction. I guess my question is in terms of a DEI part. Is I feel like, it's billed as this idea that's going to help Black and Latino students in getting college degrees, but I worry that if you move away from kind of standardized tests and you move it to a model where you're looking at extracurricular activities, then that also puts them at a disadvantage as well. But so as we move into that, is there a mechanism to even check what is the impact on underrepresented minorities in college?
I can certainly talk with Dr. Schmertz and see what kind of data we have on that. I am uncertain about specific details of admissions data, and our ability to do an analysis, but I'm sure we can take a look at something in that arena. It may not be specifically around SAT scores, but we can certainly take a look, and I can get back to you all.
Yeah, again, my concern is usually in the past we pushed for, and for me we pushed for grad schools to kind of move away from kind of GRE scores, but when they started looking at more holistic approaches, then we also put minority students at a disadvantage there. So I always feel like this is something that I feel like we need to look a little more critically at. Yeah.
Sure. So I can see what our data has and what kind of analysis we can do.
Thank you. Commissioner Coleman? You're on mute.
Dr. Dow, do you know whether there is a designated person on each campus?
Yes.
To work with the students?
On what particular topic?
Expect the transferring, be sure they take the right courses and that matches the 4-year. I'm more interested in the community colleges, especially.
Yes, they are mandated to have at least one transfer coordinator, but we know many campuses have multiple transfer coordinators. But by our regulations, they are required to have at least one transfer coordinator, solely for the purposes of supporting students who are either transferring in or plan to transfer out.
Very good. Thank you.
Yep. On that note, we have asked institutions, in light of all of these changes around the Transfer with Success Act, we have asked them to give us an implementation plan at the beginning of January, so that we have a better sense of what they're going to prioritize. There's a lot of changes. There are a lot of changes in those regulations. So are they going to prioritize hiring more staff? Are they going to prioritize tightening up their articulation agreements? Or will they prioritize creating institutional policies that are appropriate? What are they going to do, and how are they going to do it? And when do they think they're going to be kind of fully up and running? So that'll give us a good sense of where they're putting their priorities over the next 6 to 12 months.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Coleman, one additional fact is, while we know that these new transfer coordinators will be hired, we want to make sure that there's universal training, in the sense that we do some training for them on all the regulatory changes. And at least we start off with the premise that everybody heard the same thing, and then work with it. It'll be tough for a little while, we expect, because some institutions do not like to accept transfers. So, I mean, in terms of transferring into STEM or hard sciences and engineering. So that's one area we've got to identify. Thanks.
Right.
And Commissioner Boyd? Commissioner Boyd, did you have your hand up?
Yes. Although I know we worked on this many, many times in the past, I do have one question about, under this new arrangement, what happens with the Pell Grants for students who are moving from the community college into the four-year school? Is there any attention given to that?
So the intent is, I'm glad you asked that, Commissioner Boyd. The intent is that this would not impact financial aid. We have heard concerns that it would, but we have not seen explicit evidence on how. So we're keeping an eye on that to make sure that there is no unintended consequences when it comes to financial aid, particularly federal financial aid.
Right.
The students are transferring credits. We've also been in touch with our colleagues here at MHEC who oversee veterans benefits, and we're keeping an eye on that as well to make sure that there, again, are no negative unintended consequences that impact either our veterans or financial aid in general.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, but I will say we have heard rumblings that there's concern, but again, we've not seen any explicit evidence to that.
Okay.
Good. Thank you, Dr. Dow, for a really good and solid informational report on previous recommendations. Thank you. And for clarifying some of the transfer issues. And do you want to move into the proposed Comar amendment?
Absolutely, happy to. So this is in your commission book on page 7, the commission book page 7, but the PDF page 10. Bear with me, I am just going to read straight from the memo because I think it has it's clear. So under current regulations, out-of-state institutions operating a physical campus in Maryland are only allowed to offer academic programs that are similar to programs offered at its main or primary campus. This limits out-of-state institutions in providing academic programs that may help meet industry needs in Maryland. The proposed regulatory change would allow an out-of-state institution to provide a justification for why a proposed program should be offered at its Maryland campus when that or a similar program is not offered at the main or primary campus. Under the proposed change, the Secretary could approve the academic program offering if the Secretary finds the justification to be sufficient. The proposed program would still be required to meet all MHEC regulatory requirements regarding academic programs. It would still be circulated to all other institutions of higher education in Maryland for comment or objection. And the Secretary would still deny any proposed program that would be unreasonably duplicative or otherwise inconsistent with MHEC statutory and regulatory obligations. So the proposed amendments have been approved for legality by MHEC's Assistant Attorney General as required by the Maryland Administrative Procedure Act and are now enclosed for your review and approval. Upon your approval, proposed regulations and regulatory amendments are submitted to the legislature's Joint Committee on Administrative, Executive, and Legislative Review, after which they're submitted to the Division of State Documents for publication in the Maryland Registrar. After a public comment period, they may be brought back before the Commission for final adoption. So it is recommended that the Commission approves for publication in the Maryland Registrar the enclosed proposed regulatory amendment regarding academic programs of out-of-state institutions operating in Maryland, and authorizes its Assistant Attorneys General to make non-substantive edits to the proposed regulations to conform to the stylistic and formatting requirements of AELR and DSD. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Dr. Dow? Commissioner Williams?
Yeah, thanks so much. A couple questions. First of all, thanks for the context. It's helpful. I'd appreciate your discussion around why this is coming up now. We've had a system in place for a long period of time. This is a new development. My sense is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, an out-of-state institution that's operating out of state wants to develop a new program in state. And in many cases, I suspect that venue is probably virtual, right? So there's not a level of expertise at an outside institution, but they're seeking to build a level of expertise virtually to serve in-state. And if that's generally the idea, or one version of that idea, tell me a little bit more about what's changing right now that would precipitate this proposal.
Sure. So out-of-state institutions, per either their accreditor and or the U.S. Department of Education, every institution has to have a main campus, has to have a home campus. They then may have branch campuses or satellite campuses, depending on definitions and what that looks like. So for an out-of-state institution, they often are considered branch or satellite campuses when they operate here in Maryland. For some out-of-state institutions, they may have multiple main campuses in a variety of states, just because of how they're structured and the way they've set up their organizational chart. 30 years ago, this made sense to make sure that the main campus or the primary campus had the resources and infrastructure to support a campus that is at a satellite or branch campus. That makes sense, right? You wanted to make sure that, again, resources, faculty expertise, whatnot. Fast forward to today, we know many colleges don't subscribe to that organizational structure anymore. They make decisions to call campuses branch campuses, satellite campuses, another main campus for lots of different reasons around accreditation or for financial aid purposes or for reporting to the federal government for some reason. It's really not about whether or not a campus has capacity to implement a particular program. So in that instance, we have out-of-state institutions where they may seek to operate a program here in Maryland that is not offered at their main campus. But they may have the facilities for it. They may have the faculty resources. Maryland has a need for that program for market demand. So in the absence of this regulatory change, we would likely have to deny that. We would have to deny the opportunity for an out-of-state institution to offer that program here in Maryland because it's not being offered at their main campus. Though it may not make sense for them to offer it at their main campus because of their organizational structure. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course. Thank you. Related to that, have we done any research of how other states, do we have a landscape analysis of how other states are approaching this issue? Have they had the same competitive issues that seems to be involved in your description? I'm trying to get a sense of, like, is this a larger trend around the country that we're informed by other developments, or are there specific requests coming into the state that you have no capacity or authority to address under the current rules that you're seeking some authority to address? Is there, in other words, is there a lot of demand in Maryland, and how does it meet with other states' experiences if you've looked at that?
So great questions. Thank you. I am not familiar with how other states handle this. Happy to kind of coordinate with SHIO, that's the large national organization. Happy to coordinate and put a request out to see how that would be very interesting. We don't have an explicit request from any out-of-state institutions on this front, but we have had out-of-state institutions come to us and say, is this a real rule? Are you really going to hold it to us? Because they're trying to plan accordingly. They're not going to put forth a proposal if they know it's going to be denied. And so we do know that some out-of-state institutions know about this rule. They do see that it's a barrier for them to implement what they would see as a high demand program in Maryland. So we're kind of trying to get ahead of that a little bit with this regulatory change.
Are there any other questions? Commissioner McDaniels?
Yes, thank you. Dr. Dow, you mentioned that there is a requirement for universities to have a physical, I think, center or something like that. But I guess in 2022, are there universities that operate mainly virtually? I mean,
oh yeah.
And how does this change? I mean, there are some universities that I only picture as a virtual kind of, I don't know, University of Phoenix is the right one, but how does this relate to what you said earlier, I guess, of having a center? And I just don't have a perspective on it.
Absolutely. So again, a great question. We divide out-of-state institutions into two real categories. One, a physical presence here where they are offering actual coursework. If they're just advising, or they may have space where students, we saw this with a couple of institutions where they just had some study space. Again, they had maybe some staff on hand to do one-on-one advising. We don't necessarily consider that operating. They need to be physically here teaching something, doing some kind of course content. That we consider physically here and physically present in Maryland. Otherwise, if they're doing online education to Maryland residents, then there's two pathways there for us to be aware of that and to oversee it and ensure that that they're good actors in higher education. One is through NC-SARA, which is a national reciprocity agreement, where institutions apply through their home state. This comes back to where their primary or main campus is. They apply through their home state to participate in this reciprocity agreement. The home state validates that the institution is accredited, that they are in financial good standing, that they adhere to some basic academic standards, that they adhere to whatever state regulatory standards. So our agency, we actually approve several of our Maryland colleges to participate in this reciprocity agreement to enroll non-Maryland students in their online program. So the reciprocity agreement is literally just that. It's a reciprocity agreement that is overseen by the states to ensure that only the colleges that, again, are accredited and are in good standing can participate. So if we have an institution that does not participate in the reciprocity agreement, that's kind of that second pathway in online education. They have to come to our agency and do what we call a registration. They have to register with our agency. And again, we hold them to pretty much the same standards we would hold a NC-SARA school to. Are they accredited? Do they have financial wherewithal? Do they have solid academic programs, so that we have some student protections for our Maryland residents that may be enrolling in those programs? So it's either NC-SARA or it's through online registration, and that's how we are able to manage the virtual learning world of non-Maryland colleges. Hopefully I was clear on that and that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Dr. Dow. Okay, so we have a recommendation on the floor, and Dr. Dow, did you read the whole recommendation at the end of your report?
I did, but I'm happy to read it again.
Could you do that, and then I'll ask for a motion?
Sure. So it is recommended that the commission approves for publication in the Maryland Register the enclosed proposed regulatory amendments regarding academic programs at out-of-state institutions operating in Maryland, and authorizes its assistant attorneys general to make non-substantive edits to the proposed regulations to conform to the stylistic and formatting requirements of AELR and DSD.
Great, thank you
So
very much.
moved.
Thank you, Commissioner
Second.
Howell, and seconded by Commissioner Salmon. Any final questions before I take this to a vote? All in favor, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand. And any opposed? Any abstaining? Okay, so it passes. So thank you very much. And I think now, Ms. McCowan, we're ready for you for 3 reports.
Yes, thank you. This afternoon, we're going to present what was previously known as the quarterly reports. We are now producing those on a biannual basis, so for a 6-month period of time. The reports will reflect activities from our academic affairs units from January 1st to June 30th of 22. I'm going to start with the collegiate affairs unit activity. This is from our program review unit. As I mentioned earlier in our meeting today, collegiate affairs is split between institution review and program review. So the actions in this report are reflected from the program review unit that solely focuses on those activities, substantial and non-substantial, final action letters by the secretary. This report starts on page 10 of the commission book. I hope I have my numbers correct. And it runs through page 22. Again, we're looking at program review activities for the first 6 months of calendar year 22. There were a total of 184 academic program proposals. And out of those 184, the majority of those actions were taken under new certificate programs and also for non-substantial modifications to existing programs. Again, within those program proposals, we did field a number of objections. If you are following with me, this is on page 12 of your book. The objections fielded during the first 6 months, there were 5 total. Those objections are broken down. The first one, I'll just go over them very quickly. We have proposing institutions that have submitted a proposal. It was circulated, and then we had institutions that may have objected, at least one or more that objected to that proposal. So you'll see Mount St. Mary's was our first one we have listed there. There was an objection for unreasonable program duplication that was found not unreasonably duplicative, and that action was finalized. We also had an objection from a program presented by Capital Technology University, and that was also unreasonable program duplication. That was withdrawn. The objection was submitted and it was later withdrawn. We had a program presented by Morgan State University. That program, there was an objection submitted for unreasonable program duplication, and that was found not unreasonably duplicative. Frostburg University presented 2 programs, and they were both for the institution that objected for unreasonable program duplication. They were both found not unreasonably duplicative. So those are our 5 objections during the first 6 months. I know it sounds like a lot, but keep in mind that we're now looking at a 6-month period of time.
Wait, ask one quick question.
Commissioner Serrano?
do the objections that we have, like, maybe my memory is really bad, but like, did we meet all these I know I remember Frostburg and Allegheny.
We did. We met on all of them, except, if I'm correct on this, I think the objection was withdrawn before we had to meet on Capital Technology University, but otherwise the commission considered the other objections.
Okay.
Yeah, I also, Madam Chair, the Frostburg and Allegheny, if you remember, one of them during our conversation, Allegheny withdrew.
Thank you. That's correct.
Okay, so our program review unit, again, when we present our next 6 months of activity, we will include additional activity from our out-of-state institutions and our online registrations. The program review unit is reflected here in this report. So I will stop there. I want to make sure I have room for the other two as well. But if you have any additional questions or comments regarding the program review biannual report, I'll be glad to take those from you.
So any questions on this first report? Good, Ms. McCowan, I think you're ready to go ahead.
Okay, thank you. All right, and the second report is from our Career Workforce Education Unit, also known as our Private Career School Unit. That report starts on page 23 of your commission book, and it runs to page 28. The Career Workforce Education Unit is another unit within Academic Affairs, and it looks at our non-degree granting institutions. The activity within this report reflects the Secretary's final actions from January 1st of 22 to June 30 of 22. There were a total of 116 actions taken during the first 6 months. The majority of those actions were captured under our training provider questionnaires. Those training provider questionnaires are the initial step that unit takes a look at a proposing institution that is proposing a non-degree granting, from a non-degree granting institution proposing a non-degree program. The unit will take a look at the proposal and determine if it is not exempt from our regulations, requiring full approval from the Secretary to operate. The secondary course of action could be that it's exempt from our regulations, and they are able to operate because they have a certain circumstance that, such as they're training their own employees, and therefore they would not require approval by the Secretary. The third action may be that it's not regulated, meaning that it could be a short hour program or a program that does not lead to a full set of courses, or a course that does not lead to a program. So we would consider that as continuing education. So those are the actions that the Career Workforce Education Unit, also known as our Private Career School, will take a look at. The list of training provider questionnaires are listed on pages 26 through 28. I will stop there to see if you have any questions or comments regarding the PCS biannual report.
So any questions at all on this report? Okay, I think we can move on.
Okay, thank you. So our final report for the biannual report is for our Veterans Affairs Unit. The Veterans Affairs Unit serves as the Maryland State Approving Agency for Veterans Education and Training Benefits administered by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. The actions taken under this report are also for the same time frame, January 1st through June 30. Please keep in mind that in the past, we have also reported that their fiscal year is slightly different. They are operating from October 1st to September 30 under the federal fiscal year. The total actions under this reporting period are 2,161. And just to give a little context to that number, because it's a lot greater than our other two reports, please keep in mind that the Veterans Affairs Unit, their approval is secondary to the actions taken by under the other two units, private career school or our program review units. The Veterans Affairs unit takes a look at various programs in which a beneficiary can use to participate in education or training. So not only are they looking at looking at actions within degree and non-degree granting institutions, they're also handling actions for flight programs, for licensing and certification exams. They're also looking at apprenticeship and on-the-job training. So that's where their volume of work is probably about 50-50 between the on-the-job training and apprenticeship, as well as the traditional education sources. Under this report, a majority of their actions are taken under program review or new institution review. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs mandates that this unit takes a look at each institution's catalog and reviews all the programs and the policies. So the count here reflects the number of programs that they've reviewed within this 6-month period of time. It also takes a look at the facility visits and the compliance visits. Those are mandatory visits that the unit has to conduct to ensure compliance under state and federal regulations. So the unit's time is really split between those two activities. Emily, if you're still presenting, if you want to slide up just a little bit. On the next page is just a list of other activities. They handle technical assistance activities, which would be anyone who has a question about their benefits, and courses or programs that they're able to use their benefits for. They also participate in liaison activities and outreach activities. As always, on the last page of the report, which I lost count of my report pages, page 32 of your commission book, is just a list of the definitions for the program activity that you'll see within this report. I'm going to stop right there and I'll take any questions. And if you do think of any questions outside of this space, you can always email me and I'll be glad to expand upon the information within the report.
Thank you, Ms. McCollum. Any questions at all? Did somebody, I'm trying to see, did somebody raise their hand? Commissioner Boyd.
Yes, Trish, I just have one question. This 2,161 number, you're accounting for it in terms of the change of reporting periods of the 6-month time? Or are there some other factors that you think might account for that large number that looks like a big increase?
Yes. Actually, that's a good question. So 2 things. Yes, the expanded reporting period, but also the VA from time to time makes different requirements of the team. So right now they're focusing on something called risk-based survey. And part of the risk-based survey is that they have to ensure that each institution's catalog is up to date. So that triggers additional requests for updates. So the and this is a rather small team of 4 people, 2 analysts. These individuals are actually looking at each institution, college, university, private career school, their actual catalog, and they're reviewing the programs within that catalog. So that easily increases the number of actions. And just for clarity too, the actions taken under the Veterans Affairs Unit, that is actually approved by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. So the secretary doesn't actually sign these, but MHEC does comply with state and federal regulations for these program reviews. I hope that answers your question, Commissioner Boyd.
Yeah, it certainly does. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Serrano?
Yeah, I guess in terms of the review, like, do you? I see there's a component for compliance, but is there anything about the review process that looks at utilization, like who's using these benefits, and like there's, I guess I'm trying to think of like I guess mainly who's using the benefits or what if there's any benefits that are going unused.
Okay. So part of that is captured under the comparison tool that the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs publishes on their website. So there is a breakdown of utilization between states, between institutions, and the chapter in which the benefit is used. So if individuals are using benefits under what's most popular right now, which is post 9/11, chapter 33, that benefit can be used for the veteran, an active duty member, or beneficiary of those of that individual who earns benefit. So that is the best placed and the most comprehensive tool that we have to take a look at utilization. Within MHEC, we do not have access to all of the components that go into that comparison tool. So we rely on that. I can send that out to you if you'd like a link to the comparison tool, because it is very informative. It does break down the dollar amounts and also the number of individuals.
That would be great if I could see that.
I'll try to put it in the chat before we leave the meeting, if that's okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Anything else? I should have asked this question earlier when we were looking at the 2 and 4 year colleges and universities. For the non-substantial changes, when there's a change in modality, are we just talking about delivery method?
Yes. We're talking about online, in person, or both.
And is there any way of knowing of whether they have moved to a hybrid, or is it moving something completely online? And does it make any difference to MHEC? What's happening there?
Definitely makes a difference. We don't define it as hybrid, but you will see a approval or final action for both, which indicates they're offering it online and in person. The hybrid definition that word does not appear in our final action letters. But we've really seen a number, as you can imagine, a number of those over the last few years. But it's pretty consistent, I would say, though, that we get a lot of modality changes.
And Secretary Fielder, I know you have your hand up. Just if I can just do a follow-up. Does any of it relate to discontinuing in person and going only online?
Sometimes. Lindsay Bates is our program review associate director, so she probably has a better bird's eye view of what that looks like. I don't know if we've actually done a hard analysis on the number that have transitioned as a result of. I think it's just been something that's been happening over some time and increased.
It might be interesting to look at to see if there's a major shift in one direction or the other. But Secretary Fielder?
Yes, well, I signed those letters, and I can tell you there certainly has been a major change in adding an additional modality, and the majority of the time that modality is online. We've also seen the increase in the new program requests or substantial change requests, adding to have both modalities listed so that they don't have to come back later and register. We did make it easier with an announcement change probably 18 months ago, maybe even 2 years ago now, when COVID became so bad and everything was switching to online, to make it easier for institutions to change modality without going through a full academic program review as if it was new. So we did those things to try to make it simpler for the institutions.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from anyone?
If I could just note, we also see that on the continuing ed side, because we have a process within academic affairs where we look at continuing ed courses. And a number of those community colleges have requested additional modality changes. And that's also something that we have to review like we do on the credit side, just to ensure that we're talking about the same context and the same content of material.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other hands, so thank you, Ms. Gordon McCown. Nice report. Thank you very much. And Dr. Schmertz, we're going to hear from you on the opening fall enrollment.
Yes, thank you. I will be brief, but I did want to call out some of the highlights. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just walk you through the dashboard as published and linked in the commission's agenda. Sorry, trying to do too many things at once. So can everybody see my screen?
Now, yes.
Introduction and key highlights. Great. Okay. So just a background, in opening fall enrollment is a highly anticipated aggregated data collection that MHEC gets every fall. It is, its beauty is that it is a somewhat instantaneous snapshot of enrollment for that term. Those of you who've been on the commission for a while, or even sat through a cycle of reports, know that for our normal unit record collections, it can take a many number of months between when this institution submit data and when we might actually be able to have it approved for research purposes due to validation. But the beauty of this collection is it is literally aggregations, numbers and rows. I will just go ahead and get ahead of any questions regarding disaggregations further. There are no racial and ethnic disaggregations provided. There are no, the categories you see in this dashboard are what we get. Graduate students, undergraduate students, enrollment intensity of part-time or full-time, and then the signal of first-time, full-time, which is a sort of population of interest for policymakers and others as kind of a measure of enrollment intensity and interest that is sort of the normal, traditional undergraduate student that people think about, which of course, as you would see from the rates, it really only constitutes about 33,000 of the students enrolled in Maryland colleges this fall. So this first tab just gives highlights. I don't need to read them to you. You are welcome to consume them on your own. What we do is try to provide a context of the national, our performance in comparison to the national picture. The one caveat being that the national picture is reliant on something called the National Student Clearinghouse, which is a collective of national data. And they, of this report that we're using as context, reported about 60% higher education institution, which means 40% of colleges and universities in the United States had not reported on their enrollment data as of the time of this publication. So you need to take some of the national comparisons with a grain of salt, but I think what they find is that it is still a relevant enough sample that they're willing to publish on it as a national comparator. So I think the big takeaway is that the declines, the more dramatic declines that we saw last year, that we attributed certainly to COVID and a number of other factors, seems to be flattening, and that among segments, we are actually seeing some increases, as is noted. Total first-time, full-time undergraduate enrollment at the community colleges in particular is up. Again, it's a smaller portion of how people attend the community colleges, but a nice signal of people's enrollment commitment. So I'm going to go ahead and take you through a few of the dashboards. Again, this is linked in your agenda as well as on our main research page. So this is just, again, a snapshot of the year. You can see on the left undergraduate and graduate enrollment, and you can see enrollment intensity for this term. As you move on, you can see a rate change over time. This is comparing fall 21 actual enrollments to, and I will get to that question when I am done. I'm going to go through all my talking points because I don't have many, and then I will come back to whoever has a question. I cannot see my audience, by the way, due to the way I'm sharing my screen. So as you can see, there are lots of negatives here, but those who could travel back in time would know that these negatives actually, except for some graduate student enrollment increases we saw last year, this is a much less severe declination of enrollment from fall to fall than we saw with COVID. And again, back to the national comparison, in some areas we are actually performing better than national rates. The dashboard allows for some engagement with the data. So this, of course, select all gets you just that. It's graduates and undergraduate students, full and part-time, and you have the 3 trends. Community colleges are on, it is still a challenging time for community college. Again, that's part of a national narrative as well of declining enrollments. And there is much that our performance accountability report will actually be able to tell you come January on what institutions are doing to respond to that. Obviously, the public 4 years between graduate and undergraduate have somewhat of a flattening, and the state aided independent institutions also rather flat. This population, I said, of interest, which is actually the minority of way in which people attend college in Maryland as undergraduates, is this first time full-time enrollment. It means that's the first time in college, so it's your traditional freshman, and they are enrolled in 12 or more credits per term. So the nice thing about this is we do see an uptick of this, and this is somewhat against the national trend, and again is sometimes a signal of greater college-going interest generally. And then lastly, just some facts. So I am going to briefly stop sharing only so that I can see this person speaking. I'm happy to return to the presentation. So who had their hand up? I don't see it. I don't know who.
Barbara, that was me. I was just putting the link to the dashboard in the
Oh, thank you. Okay, sorry. It sounds just like the hand raising sign. So that is my summation of those data. As I indicated, you can visit our Office of Research and Policy Analysis website. And as a plug to what Dr. Dow mentioned earlier, we actually have also put out an equity-focused dashboard on faculty and the makeup of faculty and both at the community colleges and the 4-year institutions by a number of ways in which to kind of slice and take apart the data. I do plan on bringing that to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee as part of our larger discussion that was stimulated by the session we had earlier this month. So that is all I have to share. Those are the highlights. Secretary Fielder.
I just wanted to brag a little bit on the research department for moving in this very interactive format of dashboard information on the web. These dashboards will replace the need to print the data book that's historic, backwards looking, and gives the opportunity to see what's going on currently. I did find the report on the faculty and staff gender and ethnic to be very interesting in terms of looking at it. If you look at it even by discipline, saying STEM versus not STEM, male versus female, 2-year versus 4-year, you can cut and look at this information and say, okay, where do we need to make improvements? And how do we do that? So it can help us with policy. So thank you, Barbara.
You're welcome. And
when you took us through a demonstration a few meetings ago, Barbara, it is a very impressive system. It really is, and it's very helpful. I'm wondering, is the assessment or evaluation of explaining the declines in enrollment still pretty much COVID related? Is that what people are saying?
Well, it's really hard to tease apart, and we all know that the economy is certainly having an effect on individuals in that tuition costs have gone up, as have their own household costs. So there may be a bit of avoidance of enrollment due to just the sheer affordability of it. Is some speculation. Again, I'm not sure in Maryland so much as the national narrative. I think the beauty of this data is it is snapshot, but the challenge of this data is because it is a snapshot, just like if we took a Polaroid picture, it is a moment in time, and it is hard to then study the context around it without learning more from the institutions themselves. I think another part of speculation is at least for the recent past, the strong job economy, and this circumstance does not. People are making choices whether to enter a a wage-based job that actually for the first time may have actually paid a decent wage. You know, we know that service workers are making more due to their demands. Amazon warehouse people are unionizing, that kind of thing. And so again, if you're making an opportunity cost decision, perhaps taking yourself out of the workforce at this time in which you might have more negotiating power isn't savvy. And you could go to college later, maybe what some people are saying. And that again is probably more the community college population. I was at a conference yesterday and someone speculated, which we will actually be able to better answer because of the new collections we have. There is a likelihood that people are leaving credit programs for non-credit programs, credentialing programs, HVAC, truck driving, again, with incentives that have been offered. You can become a truck driver in 5 to 6 weeks and then earn a very good wage for yourself and your family with a lot of flexibility, potentially. At least that's what they advertise on those commercials that we might all see. And so I do think that there are some human beings that are leaving credit programs and going to non-credit programs.
And that's not necessarily bad. I mean,
that is not. If it is if it is on a path to a credentialed, truly like apprenticed, or there's some credentialing around it that comes with it, then there's some guarantee of good income. And for any of us who've ever paid a plumber or a carpenter in the recent past, you know, those individuals can demand a good wage.
So the reason I raised the COVID question, I'm hearing some institutions say that what they lost during COVID and they hope to get back, that they did not bring back some of those enrollments. So eventually that's going to wear out and not be an influence anymore. But I think there's still some short-term impact from what happened during COVID.
Yes, and Yu-Shin Lin, who will be presenting on the performance accountability report, indicated that what we find challenging is that it's hard to tell the difference between colleges who believe all of their problems are caused by COVID and those that are willing to perhaps be a bit more introspective, that they may have actually had other issues going on besides COVID.
That's a good point.
And in a short report, there's a lot of putting of like, our enrollments are down because of COVID, and our budgets are down because of COVID, and our such and such, and we can't get this done because of COVID. And while we respect that, we look forward to getting, as you said, kind of past it to learn a bit more about the complexity of what's going on. Like, what are we going to do about it if that's the case? So, Secretary Fielder.
What do you have control over? So,
exactly.
Fielder?
The two other things that we're seeing in this data in terms of the very big picture. For those students that were with COVID and were required to go online, they discovered for some students a whole new world out there, that they could be taking a program from an institution that's out of state or out of country that has a higher reputation and still be able to matriculate. So that's one thing that we're trying to look at. The second thing is that's evident that we have an underutilization of our financial aid. Promise is tremendously underutilized. Some of our base grants, the guaranteed access and the EEA grants, are underutilized also. Part of it is the lack of completion of the full FAFSA and failure to submit all the documents on time as necessary. So those two factors combined, and the lack of knowledge of the general population that these monies are out there to be used, lead to a decision. If you're low income, I can't afford to go to college. Right. And so we're trying to look at what can we do to counter that in terms of, marketing, branding, outreach, those kinds of things.
Right.
So the data is helpful that way, to use it as a flashlight. What do we need to be doing?
Got it. Thank you. Okay, Dr. Schmerz, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Serrano, did you have something?
Yeah, I just had a question. So on the data points that we have here in terms of enrollment, my understanding is that it's mostly for policymakers, right? Like, it's lawmakers and folks that are looking at this. Is there any way that we can maybe link the cost, like the average cost for community college or private four-year university or public four-year university into these data points here? Just so obviously we're talking about COVID, how the dips and increases are affected by that, but I think it just, for me, I'd be interested in seeing if there's the average cost would have any impact on these enrollment figures.
We could certainly, traditionally, this data has been presented in this manner. It is a compendium of the institution submissions with the national context to kind of answer the question. So what does that all mean? I'm certainly willing to consider ways in which to further contextualize the data. And I can certainly give you some more information on costs. I will tell you that the average cost of tuition and fees in Maryland's colleges, at least the public's, stayed flat. Per the other dashboard we have on tuition and fees that's up on our research website. So while the data aren't linked necessarily, maybe you raise a good point. Maybe we do a better job of to a user, we actually embed some links that might provide some additional context. But so the answer is yes, I can give you more, but not probably quite as you've asked to be delivered, only because this is sort of like a canned report. We do it this way for policymakers. And as an aside, there is institution level data that people can look at. It isn't a downloadable report. We keep it at the segment level, just as you indicated, to be the snapshot that policymakers need as they're preparing for legislative session. But certainly, Commissioner Serrano, I can follow up with some additional contextual data if you would like it.
All right, great.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Does anyone have any new business to raise? So just a reminder, the calendar for next year's meetings, the calendar was attached to the agenda. Secretary Fielder and I still need to talk, which we will do after the first of the year, about are we going to stay totally virtual, or are we going to try to at least have a couple of meetings in person, and we will get back to you on that issue, hopefully at our next meeting. And with that, Secretary Fielder.
Yes, I just want to take the opportunity to thank each of you for the tremendous input and direction that you've helped provide to MHEC this year. It's been a tremendous amount of work. There's been so many hours spent, and the effort is worth it. I think of all the legacy that you've helped create in terms of the families and individuals that we've been able to assist with their dream. While it sounds trite, it's really true. And it's so important that we get this done. I just want to say thank you and have a great holiday, and we'll see you at the start of the year.
Great. Thank you, Secretary Fielder. And let me just echo that thanks and to wish everybody a beautiful holiday season. And if any of you are feeling short on time, as I am, I hope you get to Christmas and you can find some rest and relaxation time, because I think we all need it. And with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Commissioner Howe, thank you. Seconded by Commissioner Serrano. Does anybody want to object to this? We are adjourned. Thank you all.
Everybody have a great holiday.
Bye.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.